Kevin, I didn't do that. Let's give a warm welcome to where is Chris? Ladies and gentlemen, if I could if I could have your attention, we want to begin. So let's give a very warm New Hampshire welcome to the Honorable Governor of the great state of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis. I don't think it was on.
Well, somebody hit something. Yeah, see that means it's on. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a very special mid edition of our Politics and Eggs, and we're very pleased that so many of you could join us today at standing room only. I want to start by thanking our Politics and Eggs series sponsors, whose banners you see around the room today. Without the ongoing generosity of these sponsors, these programs simply would not be possible. And we are grateful for their commitment to not only today, but to the entire series, and giving the business community the opportunity to hear from presidential candidates as they visit this wonderful state. I also want to take the time to thank, at this time, New Hampshire Institute of Politics and our co-host here in this series for their ongoing collaboration. The New England Council could not ask for a better partner in the ongoing initiative. I want to take a moment to quickly remind you of a few of our New England Council upcoming events. Next week, we'll be hosting House Minority Leader Whip Catherine Clark in Boston. New Hampshire's own Congressman, the 1st Congressional District here, Chris Pappas, will be speaking to the New England Council in Washington. The following week, we'll be in Providence for a breakfast at Senator Sheldon White House. And of course, we hope you'll all be joining us on October 26th at our annual 2023 annual celebration, where we will be celebrating four incredible New Englanders of the year. And as of this morning, we have 193 tables sold. Today, we are honored. We're honored to welcome Governor Ron DeSantis to the Granite State as he campaigns for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. I'm now pleased to introduce my good friend, our good friend, the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics here at St. A's, the Honorable Neil Levesque, who will introduce the governor.
I was going to say good morning, but obviously we're in the afternoon. A little creme brulee, a little bit different for Politics and Eggs. Boy, what a great day this is to have our speaker here today. As we all know, Governor DeSantis is a leading figure in the conservative movement. He's a distinguished record of public service, including being the 46th governor of the state of Florida. But he was first elected in 2012, 14, and 16 to Congress, as we know, and elected governor in 2018 and re-elected in 2020 with 1.5 million more votes than his opponent. That's more people than even live in here in New Hampshire, so that's pretty good. During his tenure, he's focused on economic growth, job creation, education reform, and in his education, he's an attorney, and with that, he served, of course, in the United States Navy as a JAG officer. So without further ado, I want to welcome the Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate the introduction. Thank you all for being here. It's great to be back in New England. You know, I'm a native Floridian, born and bred, but I did spend 7 years of my life in New England for education. And I say that I'm one of the very few people in this country who can say that I made it through both Harvard and Yale and came out more conservative than when I went in. It's not easy to do when you're talking about that. We also have at home, my wife, we've got a 6, 5, and 3-year-old kids. They're native Floridians. They have never seen snow before. So part of our goals in this campaign over the next 90 to 100 days, being between Iowa and New Hampshire, they're going to get to see snow, hopefully, for the first time. And we're trying to figure out, is it going to be in New Hampshire or is it going to be Iowa first? But either way, we're going to get them to be able to do snowballs and all the things that they want to be able to do. You know, I was a blue-collar kid growing up in Florida. My mom was a nurse. My father worked for Nielsen TV ratings, where they actually had to put a device on the family's cable boxes back then. And I started working minimum wage jobs. I was a baseball player all growing up, had very good youth baseball, high school baseball, and my horizons were basically focused on that. I got recruited to go to places like Yale and Princeton for baseball. And I had never been to New England in my life, never thought to be able to do anything like that. And so I show up my first day on campus doing what somebody from the west coast of Florida would do. I wore flip-flops, I wore jean shorts, and I wore a t-shirt. Not something that was necessarily in vogue on an Ivy League campus, much less when you had kids that went to Andover Academy and all these other places. So it was a different culture for me, but throughout the whole time, I just kept working hard. So I did school, I did sports, and I worked every odd job under the sun to be able to get through school and to be able to advance myself, starting with $6 an hour, working through as many things I can. By the time I graduated, I was known as the most employable kid on campus. If someone needed something, I'd just get random phone calls. Hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And we did. And so that was kind of the ethic I had. But my view was, look, I want to be able to do well in this world. America gives me the opportunity, so I'm going to work hard to put myself in a position to do it. I ended up in New England at Harvard Law School. And then that was after September 11th, and so I made a different career choice. But I can say I was up here when the Red Sox won the World Series in 2004 and broke the curse. And I'll tell you, it was a big deal to be up here. And for all 7 years I was up here, I was rooting for the Red Sox over the Yankees. Don't worry about that. In fact, my first year in college, one of my friends that I'd played youth baseball with growing up, his father was actually managing Boston at the time, Jimmy Williams. He was a great guy. And he called me one day and said, hey, I'm going to go to a game at Fenway. Do you want to go? I'm like, of course I want to go. I've never been. So we got in a car from Connecticut, drove up. You show up, and it's a really neat experience. Tickets are at will call. And it's me and another probably freshman or sophomore, 18, 19-year-old kids. And we hand the ticket to the usher. And, this is like a crusty veteran usher. And he looks at it. And these are pretty good seats, and he's looking at us. He's like, what's going on here? He's like, all right, walks us up. We're literally right next to the dugout. You look straight ahead. You have the green monster. And then after the game, we were in the office with Jimmy, and you see Pedro Martinez and all these other people. So I got a really intimate view of Fenway Park for my first experience, and I'll never forget it. It was something that we already did. So I was up here for that, and it was a huge deal, and it was really exciting. But I made the decision to join the military, to volunteer, and to volunteer to eventually serve in Iraq. And so when you see what's going on with Israel and Hamas, a lot of that brings back memories with respect to the war on terrorism. I spent time in Guantanamo Bay at the detention facility on active duty, and then we were in places like Fallujah and Ramadi and al-Assad, Western Iraq, a lot of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And there was some bad stuff that happened, but I'll tell you, I don't think I ever saw or heard or read a report of anything approaching the level of barbarism that we saw over the weekend with respect to Hamas, the decapitation of babies, executing elderly people. It really reached a new level of depths of depravity, and it just shows you that there is evil in this world. The other thing that I remember from being over in Iraq was, in spite of all the talk of al-Qaeda and the Sunni terrorists, and that was real, most of the combat deaths that our folks were facing were from Shia militias that were funded by the Iranian government. And we lost hundreds of U.S. troops, probably over 1,000 during that period. And so you want to talk about Iran funding Hamas and the Hezbollahs. They've been doing this for decades. They funded the attacks on our Marine barracks in 1983 in Beirut. So I'm no stranger to the role that Iran plays in all of that. So we did that. And I end up, they talked about some of the political, wasn't necessarily something I had set out to do, but by age 40, I end up the governor of Florida, the country's third largest state and the 13th largest economy in the entire world if we were our own country. So I'm really a testament to the American dream, because a lot of people would not have bet their chips that I would end up be running for president, be elected governor, any of this stuff. Certainly I would not have predicted that at the time. And I'm running for president now because I think we're in danger of being the first generation of Americans that are going to leave to our kids and grandkids in America that's less prosperous and less free than the one that we inherited. You look what's happening in the world. You look at our economic problems at home. You look at the state of our cities. You look at all these issues. We see the country in a period of decline. Now, I don't think that decline is inevitable. I think the decline is a choice. And so it's going to fall to us to make the types of decisions and exercise the type of leadership that are going to reverse that decline, that are going to usher in an American revival, and that are going to give this country a new birth of freedom. And that's exactly what I intend to do as the next president of the United States. And we'll start with the economy. We will reverse the trends that we're seeing. Why are we seeing higher prices? Why are we seeing interest rates with that? It was government-induced by their response to COVID, which was a total disaster, by borrowing and printing trillions and trillions of dollars, acting like that wasn't going to cause disruptions in the economy. Of course it's going to. You can't spend money and borrow and print money without consequence. We need to discipline the Congress, and I'll be willing to do that as president with the veto pen. We also have too much bureaucracy, too much red tape that bears down and stifles innovation, particularly for small businesses. We're going to get rid of that, and we will utilize the energy resources that we have in this country. We have more energy resources, if you look at places like the Marcellus Shale, than any country in the entire world. It'll help for you to pay lower gas prices. It'll help to pay less for everything throughout the economy when the energy prices are lower. It's good for jobs. It's good for our industrial base, but it's good for our national security. You look at Iran, you look at Russia, you look at China doing a Green New Deal type policy where we try to kneecap that production. That benefits them. Us being the dominant energy producer in this world hurts all the right people. We will make sure we'll do that. That'll be good for the economy, but it'll be good for our country. We're also going to restore sovereignty in this country. You cannot be a nation state and have 7 million people pouring across your border illegally. Do you not think that our enemies around the world have not exploited that open border? We know people have come from China and Iran and Russia throughout the Middle East. That happens every day, and yet it's just happening without really a care in the world by the powers that be. Of course, that's also led to fentanyl coming into this country in levels that we've never seen before, and it's triggered deaths in this country at levels we have never seen before. We're losing over 100,000 people a year because of the opioid epidemic. And look, addiction's a tough thing, but this is not limited to people that are habitual drug users. You will have students who think that they're taking a pill to relieve stress, and it happens to be laced with fentanyl. And they take one pill, and they die. And I've met a lot of the angel moms throughout the United States who've had this happen, where they've lost a loved one. We had a situation in Florida. A family was renting an Airbnb unit. 18-month-old baby crawling on the carpet. There happened to be residue from fentanyl from the previous tenant, and the baby died just by coming in contact with that fentanyl. So this has got to stop. We're going to declare it a national emergency on day one. We're going to marshal all available resources, including our military, to stop the invasion of this country. And yes, I'm going to build the wall. You know, Donald Trump promised in 2016 he would build the wall and have Mexico pay for it. And more recently, he was in Iowa. He says, well, there was no mechanism that he could make Mexico pay. He didn't have a legal way to do it and all this other stuff. Now, that's not what he said in 2016, because I went to those rallies. He was saying Mexico's going to pay. So he didn't do that. The reality is you actually can have Mexico pay. They're not just going to fork over money. You can impose fees on the remittances that foreign nationals send back to Mexico who work in the United States or in Central America. You'd raise billions and billions of dollars. I'd rather they pay for it than have it be paid by the general taxpayer. So we're going to do that. We'll get the job done. But more important than that, we're going to treat the Mexican drug cartels like foreign terrorist organizations. They are invading this country, they are killing these people, and we're going to use lethal force to put them in their place. We're also going to ensure that our military is the strongest in the world and that we remain the world's leading superpower. We are not on a trajectory to continue being the world's dominant superpower, and what happened in Israel reminds us that there's a lot that's going on with terrorism still, as much as some of us would hope that that's not the case. It's real. But we're also in a period where we do have a great power rival with the Communist Party of China. They want to be able to eclipse this country economically. They want to be able to eclipse this country militarily. And if they're able to win that battle over the next decade, decade and a half, that will affect the lives of every American in a really, really significant way. So we're going to ensure that we remain the top economy, that we remain the top military, and that we're able to deter Chinese ambitions, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And when we do that, 21st century will still be an American century. We're also going to ensure that schools in this country focus on traditional education, not on indoctrination. We should have, I'm a parent of a 6, a 5, and a 3-year-old. You know, my kids are in these early grades. We had to fight the fight in Florida to say, you know what? We're going to teach math, we're going to teach reading, we're going to teach science. We're not going to teach first graders that they can have interchangeable genders. That is not appropriate. That is not right. So we've stood by the rights of parents, and I think parents have the right to direct the education and upbringing of their kids. That should be the case all across this country, including choosing the school of their choice like they can do in Florida. And you know how I know that works? Because I grew up in Florida. We were not well regarded in education at the time. We're now fully invested in parental choice, and we finished 3rd and 4th respectively in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math in the 2022 Nations Report Card. So it works, and we need to do that from coast to coast. We also have to have a situation that whether you live in a blue state, a blue city, a red city, criminals are held accountable for their misconduct. If you do the crime, you do the time. What's happening in a lot of our cities is they've turned their back on the rule of law. They've put a political agenda over accountability. These cities have corroded, and I know because people move to Florida and they tell me about it. Everyone has a right to raise their family in peace and security, and we're going to make sure the rule of law reigns supreme. And then finally, we need to restore the proper understanding of the U.S. Constitution. Our founding fathers created 3 branches of government. They did not create a 4th branch of government, an administrative bureaucracy that governs almost irrespective of elections. Government should be limited, and it should work alongside us. It should not be unaccountable and weaponized against us. And part of what I'll do is we're going to usher in a reckoning for all the agencies that were involved in the COVID-19 policies. Those policies hurt a lot of people. They hurt people's jobs, they hurt kids' education, they hurt people's ability to choose whether they wanted to work or not because of some of the mandates, and nobody has been held accountable for it. Florida rejected that, and the state has never done better, and we had the lowest excess mortality in the entire Sun Belt, partially because we let people make their own decisions. So CDC, NIH, FDA, all these agencies have failed the American people. We're going to bring a reckoning that we're going to make sure there's accountability so that this never happens in our country again. And there's many more things we're going to do. I think part of what people say is, okay, well, how do you trust someone running for office? What's it about you that would lead to you being able to do this? And I think people can trust me to do it because I'm the only one running for office today that has actually accomplished everything I told the voters I would accomplish. We delivered on 100% of our promises. Compare what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now with not even being able to pick a speaker. In Florida, we don't do political empty calories. We don't do showmanship. It's not a game. It's about delivering results, and that's how we focus our leadership on, and the results we've been able to produce are second to none. We've run massive budget surpluses every year I've been governor. We've paid down almost 25% of the state's total outstanding debt just since I've been governor that we've accumulated throughout the entire history of the state. Of course, we have no income tax, and I know people in New Hampshire appreciate that because, you know, anytime I go northeast, I don't find a lot of places hospitable to taxpayers. You got that one little dot in New England, the live free or die state, so we appreciate that, but we have the second lowest per capita tax burden in the entire country. We have universal school choice, and so you have a lot of low-income moms that have been able to send their kids to the school of their choice. We have charter schools, which are public schools, but not run by the school district. If you took the 363,000 charter students in Florida, disproportionately low income, disproportionately racial and ethnic minorities, if they were their own state, those 363,000 students would rank one of the top 5 performing states in the entire country. So we've delivered results on education, but we've also understood that a 4-year brick and ivy university, as much as we like some of the universities, that's not the only way you can be successful. We've created workforce education as a centerpiece of our strategy to give people more opportunities and to help our economy because we need this skilled labor, and we're proud of doing that. We've cracked down on illegal immigration by doing things like banning sanctuary cities. We've kneecapped ESG, environment, social governance. Basically, it's being used by private sector to impose ideological agenda on society, but these are policies that could never win at the ballot box, and they're trying to do it through asset managers and Wall Street banks. So we said no for our pension fund. We took $2 billion away from BlackRock, who was managing that, and they have an agenda. And we said the rating agencies can't use ESG when they rate our state and municipal bonds. And so we fought back against that. We're not going to be successful as an economy if every business becomes hyper-politicized. We've prohibited the purchase of land by the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliates. They're trying to get farmland. They're trying to get land near military bases. Not happening in the state of Florida. We've enacted the Parents' Bill of Rights to confirm our view that parents have the fundamental right to direct the education and upbringing of their kids. We've actually made a dent in the opioid crisis. Now, you talk about the supply and the cartels. We've done bills to hold dealers, and we got to do that. You got to fight supply. But you also got to fight demand, and you got to fight from the treatment perspective. So Florida enacted a coordinated opioid recovery network, probably in about 27 counties now we have. And what it is someone goes into the hospital, they overdose. If you put them just right back on the street to their own volition, they are likely going to relapse and eventually will likely have a fatal overdose. That's pretty much what happens. So when you have an intervention, you provide support, you link them with the appropriate treatment. We have less than a 10% relapse rate of the people that have been involved in that. And year over year, I think we're the only state in the country that actually had a decline in overdose deaths outright. And that's not happening anywhere in the country. So we've taken on that issue and done very well with it. And then, of course, we had to make a decision when COVID hit. And while so many states were throwing the rights of their citizens out the window, we had to make a decision, are we going to let our state descend into some type of Faucian dystopia where people's livelihoods were destroyed and their freedoms were curtailed, or were we going to empower people with information so they could make the best decisions for themselves? Are we going to make sure our kids get an education? Are we going to make sure that we save these businesses? And we had to make decisions which were not popular at the time, certainly with the media, not popular with the bureaucracy, not popular with the other party, and even within my own party weren't necessarily popular. But a leader has got to put the interests of the people he represents over protecting his own political hide. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. A lot of people told me you weren't going to be long for this world because you were cutting against the grain so much, but I was willing to let the chips fall where they may, and you know what? We were right on having kids in school. We were right on making sure businesses could succeed and thrive. We were right on not imposing mandates for things like COVID shots on people. And you know how I know we're right? Because Florida currently ranks #1 for economy by CNBC, #1 for education by U.S. News and World Report. We're the #1 state in America for new business formations. We've led the nation in net in-migration. Every year since I've been governor, anytime Massachusetts raised the tax, I get more Florida residents. Chicago does something dumb, I get more Florida residents. You can set your clock to it. Our crime rate is at a 50-year low, even as crime has spiraled out of control in so many other areas around the country, and we're #1 for growth amongst all large states. So we promised we would do things. We've delivered results for the people that we represent. And at the end of the day, we can sit here and talk about all this stuff, the posturing to this. All that matters is whether you're producing results. So 2024 is make or break. Republicans need to stop making excuses. We're not going to get a mulligan on the 2024 election. We're either going to get the job done, we're going to be able to chart a better path for this country, or we're going to continue to dig ourselves deeper and deeper into a hole. As the nominee of the Republican Party, I'll get the job done for the voters. As a leader, I'll be someone that you can be proud of. And as your president, I promise I will not let you down. Thank you all for having me. God bless you. Questions?
Pretty good, huh? Yeah, well, very good. Okay, we have a few minutes, and some people have been kind enough to give me a couple of questions to ask our very special guest here today. You mentioned about Israel and what we've all witnessed over the weekend, the horrific murders of children, women, adults, and elderly, disabled, and slitting the throats of children. What do you think the administration should be doing more that you would do as president?
Well, first, I think it's just important to be honest about what we're dealing with here. I mean, Israel, from the late 1940s, has been under siege. They agreed to a partition plan. The Arabs rejected it and went to war. Israel won their independence. Then they were going to face an invasion in 1967. They preempted that in the Six-Day War and won. Then they were invaded on Yom Kippur in 1973. They won. Then they faced a series of intifadas, waves of terrorist attacks for many decades. And the root of the conflict is that Palestinian Arabs, they're not seeking their own state. They're seeking the annihilation and eradication of the Jewish state. That is what Hamas has pledged to do. That is even what Fatah has pledged to do. So Israel's in that situation where it's not like they just have a political dispute. They have people in their neighborhood who do not believe they should exist, who would push all Jews into the sea if they could do it. So they have every right to defend themselves. I think the administration has said that, but the question is, are you going to have the staying power? Because people are already blaming Israel for this. What's happening on these college campuses is really, really disturbing. When you have Harvard students signing some of these letters right after the news of Hamas's butchering of these innocent people comes out, and you're going to sign your John Hancock on that letter at that time, you know, what is going on with our society? I'm a big supporter of Israel. You can take whatever position you want, but to celebrate that, I think, is wrong. So I think they need to say we're in it for the long haul. I don't think there's going to be a lot we're going to even need to do militarily. They have their own armies. They have their own defense. They've never asked us to displace their own obligations. They'll do it. We may have to provide some additional support like we've traditionally done, but I think mostly it's just the moral clarity to say they don't have to live like this. They do not have to accept the risk that terrorists are going to come in and start beheading their babies. And so eradicating Hamas's infrastructure, everything, so that the organization ceases to exist should be the goal, and they should be willing to do it. I would also take back the $6 billion. I would have never given that to Iran. Take that back. Iran is the fomenter of global terrorism. You're not going to have a rapprochement with them. Easing up on oil sanctions is a mistake. I would tighten up all of that to dry up money going into the Iranian regime. If you do that, you are going to have less terrorism throughout the Middle East. There's no question about that. And then we've stepped up in Florida because there's problems about people getting out of Israel. I know the administration said, well, maybe we'll send some people to Europe, but just dumping people in Europe I don't think is going to work. So I've activated my emergency response personnel. We're going to be running flights from Israel to Florida for Floridians who are trapped in Israel and want to come home. And I think every American should be able to get out of the war zone with the help of the U.S. government. If they're not going to do it, then the state of Florida will step up and answer the call.
Former President Trump had a different point of view. He criticized the Prime Minister being weak. He also mentioned a terrorist group as being very smart. My question really is temperament. How important is temperament when we look at a candidate for President of the United States?
Well, I think as a leader, you're in a situation, as governor it's been true, president even more so, the buck stops with you. You're going to have to make decisions that are significant. What are you bringing to bear in terms of those decisions? What's your foundation? How are you seeing these issues? And I think having a temperament that is agreeable is something that's very helpful. You don't want to be in a situation where you're making decisions because somebody personally slighted you and you're mad at that. No, the decisions are not about things people have done to you. Decisions are about how it's going to impact the people that you represent. So with respect to Bibi Netanyahu, Donald Trump is still mad that Bibi congratulated Biden with a tweet in November of 2020. And he's like, I'm never going to talk to him again, all this other stuff. So why bring that up when their nation is now at war and facing the worst attack that they've ever faced to try to have that dispute aired publicly? That is not how you treat an ally. It's not how I would treat an ally. But I think more importantly, broader for issues coming forward, I appointed people in Florida who were against me in the primary when I was running for governor in 2018, said he's not this, he's not that. That's kind of political season, but then I got to make a decision. If this is somebody that can do a job and do it well for the people of Florida, am I going to just let my personal trump what's right for the people? No, I'm not going to do that. You've got to be bigger than a lot of this. You've got to look higher. A leader can't get dragged into the muck on all the stuff that happens in our society. You got to know there's true north out there. How do you get to true north? What are you trying to accomplish? All this other stuff, the drama, all the stuff, the circus atmosphere that politics has developed into, none of that is helpful for actually accomplishing what you need to do. So rise above that, make clear-eyed decisions, and I do think that that's rooted. I mean, some people have temperament to do that. I think I'm somebody that does. I understand what happens in this business. I can predict what people are going to say before I even do certain things. It's just hardwired. That's just what it is. I chalk it all up to that's just politics. I don't let it get to me personally. I don't mind the attacks as much as I get them because I understand that just goes with the territory. But I'm not going to let that, even if I was bothered by it, I would not let that color my decisions when it comes to big issues. Those decisions are going to be made with synthesizing information. They're going to be good, solid, crisp decisions, but it's going to be about your best interest. It's not going to be any about my issues.
It's off the front pages today, but the murders continue and people are losing their lives every day in Ukraine. Initially, I think you were criticized by some Republicans in the position early on, and I was just wondering if you could give us an update on how you assessed the Ukraine situation and our role and our involvement there.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think what I've said has proven out to be correct in the sense that Russia is not going to be able to dislodge the Ukrainian government. They're not going to be able to have a Belarus-style puppet state. So in that sense, that's a Ukrainian victory and a Russian loss. At the same time, the idea that us paying salaries for bureaucrats in Ukraine is going to lead to Russia doing a World War II type surrender, that is not what's going to end up happening. And so they now have a policy that's rudderless. There's no clear conception of how this is brought in for a landing. There has been a lot of money put in, but I think even more importantly that it's the lack of concrete objective that they've still not been able to articulate. Look, there's some Republicans that are saying, like, you know, go into Moscow, do all these things. I think trying to create a wider war here would be a huge mistake. We're $33 trillion in debt. Honestly, we're going to send American troops to be involved to adjudicate the Donbass? No. So the big failure of American foreign policy since the end of the Cold War is our engagements have not had crisp resolutions. I know it's not always easy, but you have to know what you're achieving, and then you have to say, here's what's going to take to actually achieve that. And what I see going on is I see a policy that's directionless. I think they're already saying this is going to go on for another 4 or 5 years. A lot of people have died. 4 or 5 years later, are the facts on the ground going to look a lot different than they are now? And so if they're not, we've got to find a way to have a resolution that benefits U.S. interests, that's not going to reward Russia for their aggressive conduct, but is going to recognize that a sustainable peace is in our interest. What I would do, I would put pressure on Russia through energy and through some of these other means that the administration has not been willing to do. Energy fuels Russia's war machine. They don't have much else going in terms of their economy other than that. And so if that's something that you're really concerned about, whether it's Europe or the United States, we've got to come together. Europe should not have to worry about Russia for energy. We should be able to provide energy. We have enough natural gas to supply the entire world if we did it and we exported it. So that's the way you put pressure on them to do, but their policy is not delivering what the rhetoric suggests. And the question is are they going to be able to articulate a clearer mission here?
So the administration and the Democratic Congress wants to spend more money for Ukraine. They believe they need the money now more than ever. The House that's in the hands of the Republicans have indicated, almost 100 members saying, we will not give any more money to Ukraine. Would you support that initiative?
So I think what a lot of the Republicans are saying is, we need a clear strategy before we're going to deploy any additional resources. And I think that that's totally reasonable to request that and to say, what will those resources do going forward? I said from the very beginning on this, we can't just be writing blank checks. Writing blank checks is not something that's going to end up working, and we've seen how a lot of that money has been spent. So define the mission. And I think that's where the Republicans, most of these Republicans, are now landing with respect to this conflict.
As a former member of Congress, seeing how they're dysfunctional right now, where they don't have a leader, how does that affect your campaign?
Well, look, I think the contrast between what's going on in Washington, where it's high on political theater and low on results, is almost the complete opposite of what we've done in Florida, where we kind of speak softly but carry a big stick. We deliver big results. We don't do political empty calories. We're not out there doing things for fanfare. We're not trying to create any palace intrigue. We know there's certain things we have to do, and so we just deliver on that. That's what they need to be worried about in Washington. And so you have battles over leadership. It's happened before. The question is, if that's what's going to happen, what's the end goal? What's the result of that? How are we better off as a result of going through this? And what I see is I see a bunch of people with like chickens with their head cut off. I don't see any direction here. I don't see any plan to be able to make the country better. And so if it's just about you creating a ruckus or you being able to get yourself in the limelight, that's not an appropriate reason to be doing some of this stuff. In Florida, I don't have any time for the entertainment part of governance. I don't have time for any of that. All I have time to do is to be able to focus on what do I have to get done? What did I promise to do? How do I bring that in for a landing? And that goes a lot of different things, legislatively, executive. We're coming kind of, hurricane. We had one hurricane earlier. We're always on guard in hurricane season for that. Ready to go if we have a storm. Ready to go if we have other contingencies that happen. And Washington, I think, is just the opposite of that. And it's not going to bode well for the party going forward if they don't get their act together. I mean, I think ultimately the most important thing for who controls the House and Senate will be who's the presidential nominee, Because if it's me, I think we'll be able to sweep in people like we did in Florida. I think if it's Donald Trump, I think you're going to see down ballot effects that are going to make holding the House very difficult.
One of the issues that the Republican candidates from top to bottom are struggling with is abortion. And with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, you have signed a law into your state, a 6-week ban. There are candidates that are talking 15-week ban, 12, 20, 25. Do you think there'll be any consensus with you and your colleagues on how to come up with a proposal?
Well, look, I think that, this is something that I've said this is more of a bottom-up issue, because I think that what flies in Iowa and Texas is not going to be the same as New England. You just have disagreements on the issue. That's just the reality. So people are saying, well, what are you going to do federally, all this other stuff? First of all, you have to have societal agreement to even be in that conversation, and I think you have a lot of disagreement. State of Florida, we have the heartbeat protections with all the exceptions that people have asked for over the years, and that's just based on science, on when you can detect the heartbeat, that it's a distinctive individual. Other states in the Southeast have done even more. And then, of course, you have California, New York, and probably Massachusetts, more liberal on it. But I think it's likely going to work its way that way. I think to have a societal consensus, in the absence of a societal consensus, the idea that the Republicans are going to quote solve the issue federally. I've told people not to bet their chips on that.
And you mentioned in your opening remarks that you would go after the drug cartel in Mexico with military personnel. You go right into the country. They are a friendly nation of ours. How would you go about doing that?
Well, look, I think that, do you think that we could have this many opioid deaths and this many illegal aliens coming into our country if Mexico was 100% working to stop it? Of course Mexico is at minimum derelict in their duty, and their relationship between the drug cartels and their government is not something that is ideal. The reality, though, is we are being invaded by these cartels. They are bringing poison in, and they're killing our people. So as Commander-in-Chief, you have the right to respond when American lives are being taken, and I think you have a responsibility to do it. What are we going to say? We could just do another 50,000? It's going to get to 200,000 a year? Are we really? And we're also going to do maritime operations to intercept some of the precursor chemicals that are coming in from China, because China gives the chemicals, cartels make it, and then we do. So we're going to categorize the cartels as something akin to either a foreign terrorist organization or a transnational criminal organization. That gives authority, or at least marks how we're going to go approach it. But I saw when I was down there recently, most of the border's wide open, but you do have some places where there's wall or there's these steel beams, and the cartels will cut through the steel beams. So I was down there, these guys are fixing this wall. I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, we're fixing it. They just cut through it. I was like, do you stop them? They're like, no, the Border Patrol, they're told to stand back. I'm like, stand back? They have a backpack full of fentanyl. They're knifing through reinforced steel, and we're just going to let them do that? So I said on that, we'll have force there. You break in, you're going to end up meeting your maker. And you know what? If you do that a few times, you're going to see a change in behavior. But I am not going to sit here as the President of the United States and let 18-month-old babies die because of fentanyl residue. I'm going to do something about it.
Just a final question. One of your opponents, the former president, says the 2020 election was stolen from him. Do you agree?
Well, I've said many times, I said, if that is true, he was the sitting president of the United States, and let that happen to him. I would never let that happen. As governor, would I just sit there and let something like that happen? So on the one hand, you either say that, and then it's like, why didn't you do something about it? And if you didn't do something in 2020, how are you going to solve that problem as a private citizen rage tweeting from Mar-a-Lago? There's just no way. So I think it's an untenable position that he's taken, and I also think that view hurt our candidates in the 2022 election. When they were running on that, part of it is just you're looking to the past. part of it is, you're indulging in this stuff. Now, I will say that because I was asked about this, I think I was on like Bill Maher's show, and I had to point out to him, Democrats said 16 was stolen. They said Russia stole the election. We had a massive investigation on Russia collusion, and there was no there at all. So I'm not going to sit here and say that Trump is unique in this. Hillary, I think to this day, says that the election was stolen for her. My pledge to the Republicans who are going to decide the nomination is, you nominate me, I will get the job done. I'm going to make sure we have whatever we need in place to be able to get the job done. I'm not going to make excuses. I don't like all the mail ballots going out when they don't even have accurate voter rolls. There's huge problems. We fixed it all in Florida, but there still persists. So do what you got to do to protect your folks, but don't whine about it. You got to go out there and you've got to make it happen.
Just a softball question. When you become the presidential nominee for president, name 2 or 3 people would be on your list that you would be interested in.
Anybody have any suggestions here? Now, look, I think I get asked a lot, VP, Attorney General, Secretary, the minute you put out a name, the media will start attacking them and anything like that. So the last thing I want to do is put somebody out there to just get smeared for no reason. So, and some of it's a bit presumptuous. I got a lot of work to do. We're going to do it, but I got a lot of work to do. But here's, I would say, what you're looking for in terms of the qualities. It's the first executive decision you make as a president. And you're not president yet, but that running mate decision is the one first order decision you make. And so what it has to be is somebody, when you pick and you roll out and do that press conference, everybody's here, regardless of what you think of their views or that, you say, that person could be president. That person can do the job. No question, they could do the job. That is the threshold you've got to reach when you're talking about a running mate. And that's not always been the case in the past. There have been decisions that have been made, and I would say with Biden, but others, where there was questions about that. So that's going to be number one. And then number 2 should be somebody who shares the broad governing philosophy and agrees with the broad strokes of the agenda, because you don't want to win the election and then down the line, fate strikes and you can't continue. Someone steps in and then they go a different direction than what the voters said. So it's got to be somebody that believes in the agenda. But I would put those 2 miles ahead of anything else. I think the idea that we're going to try to have a running mate because it's like, oh, well, there's, this ethnicity or that part of the country or all that can get too cute by half. Get the big decision right. This is somebody that could walk into the Oval Office, do the job, and this is somebody that is going to bring a set of values and convictions with them that are going to be reflective of what the voters hopefully will ratify in November of 2024.
We have time for a couple of questions. I know Karen from AARP has a question for the governor. Going to wait for the mic.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question, Governor, and welcome to our beautiful state, and thank you for being here. My question has to do with the caregivers of this nation. We have currently 48 million Americans who are serving as caregivers to their loved ones, and they are unpaid, and they are saving us $600 billion annually. And so my question to you is, if you're elected president, what would you do to help ameliorate the lives of these caregivers and give them back some freedom, because they don't have any right now in the sense that they are juggling their responsibilities to family, to themselves, and to the person for whom they're caring for?
Thank you for the question, and that's something that we deal with in Florida quite a bit, given our population. I mean, I think a couple things. One, inflation is putting more pressure on all these things, but according to that, I mean, like, how are you going to be able to make ends meet when prices are going up the way they've done? And when they say inflation was 9% last year, 4%, I understand some things it's gone up 50 or 100%. You know, it's particularly when you need medical help. So I think that is going to be a big, big relief across the board. I think it will help there. The other thing we're going to do is model something like what we've done in Florida for different types of social services. If someone goes into Florida now for what means tested welfare benefits, my wife actually led the charge. We've created a program called Hope Florida. We have what's called the Care Portal. When the person comes in, a lot of times these are single mothers who are struggling. Instead of just giving them a check and sending them off, they get put into the portal, and the portal is populated with people that have plugged in charities, churches, businesses, other volunteers. It goes out. Somebody may need temporary housing. You could have a charity show up the next day, and you know what? They don't come back for government services at that point because they're on a pathway to independence. I think a similar thing for whether it's caregivers, whether it's veterans, to have an ability where you're harnessing all the energy in the community, because a lot of times people don't know what's all out there. I can tell you as a veteran, when I left active duty, I got a packet of stuff, and I didn't need anything, I was fine, but I got a packet of stuff, and I'm like, I don't know how anyone makes sense of any of this. It's just bureaucracy, bureaucrats speak. So we're going to have a situation, you go in as a veteran, all the veterans groups can plug in. Mental health, you need all this stuff right there. And so that's a model that we're going to use. Government as a facilitator to help alleviate problems in society. We're not going to get where we need to go through bureaucracy. We know there's limits of bureaucracy. We know bureaucracy creates problems. But if the role of government is to create a place where then all these other great portions of our society can be involved, you're going to see really, really good stuff. We've shown that in Florida, so we've taken that model. We have it for means-tested welfare. We've moved it to Elder Affairs. We have a Department of Elder Affairs, and we're moving it to Department of Veterans Affairs as well. And I can tell you this, with veterans, it will save lives, because these guys, when they get what they need, we do things for veterans with post-traumatic stress, like the service dogs. These service dogs get paired with the veterans, and the suicide rate goes down tremendously because they're trained to be able to assist the veterans. So there's all kinds of possibilities, but that's harnessing society and harnessing the energy and the spirit of our communities in ways that a government bureaucracy alone just simply can't do.
Other questions for yes, sir? Just identify. Yes, sir. Just wait for the mic and then identify yourself. If I can just, as he's waiting for the mic, if I could just put a pitch in for the when you mentioned the homemaker, it's really the personal care attendants. We need more personal care attendants. They're poorly trained, there's no advancement, and the wages are inadequate. You address all three, we'll have more personal care attendants, people living longer, healthier, and they want to live independently. That's my pitch.
Good afternoon, Governor. My name is Marcus Scott. I have a question. I have it written down here. China is deploying their technology around the world to dominate foreign policy and global economics. How would you treat American technology? Would you regulate them and break them up, or would you support and encourage them in global competition?
So it's a good question. I mean, I think it really depends on what we're talking about. I think the broad issue is we're in a competition with China that we need to win. So, for example, we're going to be doing more research and development through our Defense Department so that we're getting ahead of them with the use of artificial intelligence as it applies to defense products and defense systems. I think that's really important that we win that. They're doing it clearly, so we got to get ahead of them on that. I think we also need to reshore a lot of key things that we've allowed to go over to China. I mean, when COVID hit, everything we needed was made in China. There's certain things for our national well-being and security that we don't want to be made in China. Technology, they steal our technology, and I think we ought to do something about that. How you regulate, I think it just depends. I mean, for example, there's a case at the Supreme Court with Florida's case and Texas's case on free speech rights on social media platforms. We created a mechanism where individuals would have protections against being discriminated against on their viewpoint on platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and these are not. And the reason we did that is because these are companies that are advertising to the public that they're open platforms. They are not publishers, they're platforms. That's why they get liability protection from the federal government. but yet they seem to have their thumb on the scale where they disfavor one side of the political spectrum. So what we said is, we're not going to regulate directly, but we're going to give you an ability to bring a consumer fraud suit because they're getting your data, they're monetizing it, they're doing that. But I think that means more speech, not less speech. We'll see what the U.S. Supreme Court has to say. Clearly, if they are publishers, they can publish whatever they want. You have no right to be on, a newspaper or something like that. But if it's a platform and their advertising is being open, and then they're not applying their rules fairly, then I think that's so they're going to resolve that. But I think that's something that is not really related to how we do in China. In fact, I think social media is a net negative on our society with how it affects children. And they get, Mike, 6, 5, and 3, like they don't have social media, but they know how to grab devices. My wife, we leave a phone out, they will grab it. And like my son is 5, he can get on Amazon and check whether his Jacksonville Jaguars football has arrived yet. And he knows when it hasn't arrived, and he knows it's it. I'm just thinking to myself, as a parent, it's like, man, like this is some serious problems. Now, in terms of regulation of new technology like artificial intelligence, I think we got to be careful with how we use government there. I want artificial intelligence, we're not going to be able to turn the clock back. It's here. If it supplements and complements humanity, that's great. I don't want it to displace humanity. And so there may be a need to have some guardrails about what the appropriate use of it is for society. But what I wouldn't want to do is try to regulate it in a way that gives an advantage to the incumbent companies, because there's only a few that do it, and make it harder for other people to compete. I do think we want competition in that space. So I think open market there. And I can't tell you what we would need to do in January of 2025 to protect society if it came to that, because I think there's going to be so much that happens between now and then. The next 15, 16 months, there'll be a different conversation in one ways or another for that. So you got to be careful about how you do it, but I do think we have to recognize there are pitfalls and there are perils associated with things like artificial intelligence. And I don't want that to overwhelm us as human beings and as individuals.
Maybe we'll take one final question for the governor. There. Okay. You want to stand and just wait for the mic?
Hi, Governor DeSantis. I'm a student here at St. Anselm College, and there are several other students in the audience, along with a lot of younger people in the audience as well. My question to you is, what is your sort of appeals to young people, especially some younger conservatives who feel disenchanted with the Republican establishment or feel disenchanted with politics in general and want to have a life that their parents may have wanted or want a life that they want for themselves?
Great question, and good luck to you and all the students who are here. Well, one, you want somebody that's beat the Republican establishment. Here he is right here. We took on issues. We slayed sacred cows in Florida, and we did things that the public responded to positively. I showed that if you lead with purpose and conviction, we don't kowtow to the interest groups. We do what we think is right. We took a state that was a 50-50 state, and we won by 20 points, 1.5 million vote margin, as was mentioned, and that's good. So what is your future? One, we got to get the economy in order, and we need to restore the American dream. Right now, if you're starting out as a young person, if you have student loans, and then you're in the workforce, and with inflation and housing costs and everything, how they've escalated, you can't make it work. If you want to have a family in your 20s right now, you're not going to be able to make it work. We've got to fix it for those folks starting out. Because if you don't have an incentive to bust your tail to get ahead, that if you're hard work and you still end up further behind, our country's not going to work. So we're going to make sure that people that are working hard can get ahead again. That means getting a handle on inflation. And I mentioned government's got to stop spending so much money. I vetoed billions of dollars in wasteful spending in Florida, and we've paid down almost 25% of our state's debt. Washington is a tougher beast, but we really haven't had a president that's pushed back on spending since Ronald Reagan in the 80s, where he actually vetoed some of the bills for spending too much. So we've got to get back to that. We also need to do the regulatory, get the government off the back of people. The Federal Reserve needs to be reined in. I would not have appointed somebody like Jerome Powell. I think it's been a total failure what the Fed has done. They printed way too much money in response to COVID. And then when it was obvious, Milton Friedman said, you do that type of monetary expansion, you are going to get inflation 18 to 20 months later. This Federal Reserve said 12 months into COVID, oh, inflation's transitory, we have to, quote, unlearn Milton Friedman, is what the chairman said. Well, no, he knew what he was talking about. Of course you're going to get that. They had their head in the sand, and then they've been hiking rates to now you're over 8% for a 30-year fixed rate for a mortgage. How do you go from the average home price in 2019 compared to the average home price today? Your monthly mortgage payment is over twice as much today as it was then. Is anybody's income going up twice as much as it did from there? Of course it's not. So I think that's a burden on society, but that absolutely kills the American dream for young people, because it isn't like it's easy to afford a home anyways when you're in your 20s. You got to save, you got to make decisions. Now to be paying interest rate with the interest rates where they are, it totally ruins things. So we're going to do that. We're also on student loans going to do something a little bit different. I disagree with having taxpayers pay for people's student loans. I don't think it's fair that a truck driver should have to pay for somebody who's got $100,000 in debt with a degree in zombie studies. I just don't think it's fair, and we're not going to do it. But I also understand that these colleges have incentivized students to take out more loans, raising tuition. You're in there for 5 or 6 years. They like that. They just get more loan money, goes in their the administrative bloat that's occurred in the modern era is incredible. It hasn't really made the universities better. So I think that there's that. So the responsibility, I would say, was have the loans be backed by the universities. So there's going to be an incentive to make sure they're putting you through a program where you're going to be able to be gainfully employed, and if you can't meet that, then ultimately they would do. You know, Harvard's endowment, Harvard is basically a hedge fund with a university attached to it. They can afford all this stuff. I mean, give me a break. So we're going to do that. We're going to change. I think it's going to force changes in academia because there's a lot of fluff that's happened, I think, in higher education, and we should really focus on things that are going to be beneficial for the students going forward. So we're going to look to do that. I do think that will help restrain the cost because I think the cost signal will go down. We're also going to look into how can we incentivize states to do like Florida. I've not let our universities raise tuition since I've been governor. So if you're an in-state student in Florida, you can go for $6,400 a year or even less depending on the university. And so right now, University of Florida is ranked number 5 amongst public universities for U.S. News. Florida State is ranked in the top 15. Wall Street Journal just did a ranking of universities. Public and private, University of Florida was ranked 15th. They were the first public university, the only one in the top 15, according to Wall Street Journal. And, you know, you can quibble about, because I know there's other good ones, you have Virginia, whatever, but how many of them could you go for $6,400 a year in state? And if you qualify, you probably qualify for our Bright Futures Scholarship, which gives you either 100% of tuition or 75%, depending on where your board scores are. So you're basically graduating with no debt at all. And here's the thing, out-of-state tuition for our state universities is $16,000. That's less than in-state tuition at a lot of places around. So we've been very serious about saying to the colleges, like, look, we'll provide support, we'll provide funding, but we're not going to let you just raise tuition every time you need to. You need to make some cuts. You need to prune your own bureaucracy. You know, why should you be paying more tuition so that they can add another 10 DEI officers? Like, no, I don't think that that's a good deal for the students. I think the students would rather pay less and not have all those officers there. So we want to have good incentives. Florida shows it can be done, though. You do not need to go $100,000 in debt to get a decent college degree, and that should really be something that we want to do nationwide. We want to thank you. Politics and eggs.
Oh, good.
Get a
All
picture
right.
of you.
Yeah.
Right here.
I get a picture with you with a couple of them.
Yeah, come on up.